Well, everybody, I'm here with 2-Bit Jason. Jason, how you doing?
Good, sir. How are you?
I'm good.
So, our fingers are crossed. We're saying our prayers
That's
that
right.
my mic doesn't just cut the fuck out. But
Yeah. So hopefully we
we'll
get a
see.
host stream and we can get this conversation going because I've been looking forward to talking about this and we finally get to record and it's just like nope, not gonna
Yeah, I know.
happen. Let's
It's
power through.
frustrating.
Let's get it.
Okay,
So
so
René Girard.
René Girard.
Who is he? What did he say?
Core concepts of René Girard come down to mimetic theory, which is basically about people's desires and how they're expressed and copied, which can lead into mimetic rivalry. Which, when mimetic rivalry gets to a certain point, a scapegoat mechanism is employed to make sure that all against all violence is avoided and becomes all against one. That's basically some of the core tenets of his theory, and we can see the effects of it all over the place, especially with the scapegoating mechanism, which is the thing that I'm the most interested in. Luke Burgess, in his book Wanting, really talks more about the desire aspects, and where that becomes in mimetic rivalry. It doesn't talk too much about the scapegoating mechanism, um, but I think understanding the scapegoating mechanism is really critical to understanding what's going on in society, especially with social media and let's say politically in the West right now, because we've reached a really dangerous point, where if things are tipping pretty over the edge right now, and the only way out of this is through, let's say, positive mimetic spirals. So we can get ourselves out of it. I'm actually hoping a lot that Elon Musk and Twitter can actually solve a lot of these problems. I don't know, right? We'll see. But there are some very intelligent, powerful people like Peter Thiel, who is a student of Girard, who I'm cashing my chips in on that one. uh, Other than just being orthodox about it and going, well, fallen world, can't fix it. Go about your business. Um, but yeah, so to understand some of the basics of it, um, Girard's claim is that all of our desires, the desires motivate us as human beings. All our desires are external. We don't come up with them ourselves. We see other people wanting things, and then we want them. And the closer those people are to us, the more we will enter into a rivalry about it. I was trying to think of a good example of this, and it's like Christmas decorations in a neighborhood. Uh, you know, if one house becomes like the prominent house that decorates their place like crazy, all other houses will start to mimic them. They'll up their ante in terms of decorating their house, um, and sometimes real rivals will emerge. Right, where the Smith house is the house for a long time that has the most decorations, and everyone kind of rolls their eyes about it. The lesser houses are all like, oh yeah, so the Smiths with their freaking decorations, right? That's like minor key rivalry. Then let's say the Joneses start to decorate their house even more extravagantly. Then it becomes a competition, right? Like every year, it just becomes up the ante, up the ante, up the ante until you actually start seeing uh, you'll start seeing people divide into camps. You'll start seeing people in the neighborhood who prefer the Smith's house or prefer the Joneses house, and they'll come up with all these other sort of rational reasons for it. There is no rational reason. It's an irrational response to irrationality, right? Like, why would you decorate your house that much? Um, that speaks to a uh, deeper desires, uh, which, I mean, Luke Burgess talks about in Wanting about he calls them thick desires. I kind of call them prime desires. It's things that are divisible by themselves in one only, right? So their desire their let's say their desires for something that is not desires for a symbol, and the symbol is expressing something deeper. So whether it be status or control or all these other more root desires that are common within societies that really motivate people. We saw with COVID, the the whole COVID craziness and COVID cults that emerged on both sides, right, of the debate. Really, was about mimetics, right? Right? It's like people. It wasn't that people. I've heard the analysis that people trusted their government too much. It's like, it's not about trusting the government. They trusted each other around them. Like, if everyone's doing it, you start doing it, because the fear of being ostracized from the group is actually more powerful than death. It speaks to something really profound in us, that we need to be part of the group, to be ostracized from it. This is why cancel culture is so powerful. Is to be forced out of the group is like, it's worse. It's a fate worse than death in many cases, because if you died, you're gone. You're done. Game over, right? If you're ostracized, it's like, well, now you're out in the wilderness alone, and you might have a slow, painful death, or be cut off from your models, right? From now, it's like, well, what do I do? What is there, right? We don't know. And so I'm covering a lot of ground here, and you jump in anytime you want, um, but once you start seeing these things, you can't unsee them. I think that's the powerfulness of it. You were saying when you were listening to Girard break down the Jacob story, and you're reading "I see Satan fall like lightning," like you get to these sentences and you got to pause and think about it, because what he's explaining is very simple, but when it hits you like in such a profound way that it's like, oh well, now all these things make sense,
Mm-hmm.
and they make sense in not just in a intellectual way, but in like almost a spiritual way. They ground you in something, and if I'm gonna, you know, be a cheerleader for Girard, it's like it's that, he's someone once said he's the most profound thinker of the 20th and 21st century that you've never heard of,
Yeah.
and I think that's true.
He's gotten some incredibly high praises for someone who's really unknown. I mean, Mr. Barron, I think he has more followers on Twitter than the Pope does. If not, he's not far
Really.
behind. I believe might be, if it was a popularity contest, he'd be the next Pope.
Mhm.
Um, he called René Girard the modern day church father. Now he is the church father for coming decades instead of the 21st century. What's to think about that and how influential the original church fathers are, really high praise. And you begin listening to him and like, oh, I see why. I get it. He speaks directly to so much of it. Like everyone experiences mimetic desire. Everyone experiences it, but no one has really a name for it. But when you hear it, like, oh, like you said, you see it everywhere. You see it in yourself, you see it in other people, you see, you know, I see it in trends. Like I know people who are obsessed with making sure their house or their house, their actions, and their job are like, I want this kind of car, this kind of job, this kind of office, and like they want this thing. I was like, people say, oh, this marketing sold it to them. Like, no, they see that in someone they admire or respected or in the community, and they kind of like this desire it now themselves. And they can't really tell you why they want it. They come up with something like, well, I just like it. They can't really explain it, but you can see like, oh, he want to be like this guy, and they want this kind of following this desire, mimetic desire.
I mean, I think so. There's like these deeper desires that are sort of like, let's say, call them meta desires, or I call them prime desires. Um, they something like status, right? Which is, it's ephemeral. Like, what is status? We all know what it is when we see it, but we it's hard for us to pinpoint exactly what that is, right?
Yeah.
uh Guys like Trump are classic manipulators of status, right? Where it's like he knows exactly where to put that pressure to make people be almost in awe of things, or at least he had that gift. I don't know where that's at in 2022.
Who knows what's
um
going on 2022, 2024.
Exactly. A lot of these things have now become inverted, which is, I think, evidence of what Girard talks about as a negative mimetic spiral, or mimesis. So when people are caught up in in mimetics, when they're copying things ad nauseum, what ends up happening is you can get positive ones, you can get negative ones, and I think we're definitely in a negative mimic spiral. Um, uh, yeah, I'll just say this: people coming to the stream, uh, like, I'm still a relatively new student of Girard. A few good resources. David Garanowski is really great for this. Luke Burgess is great for this. There's other people who can speak much more eloquently about these things, or who've thought a lot more about this than I have. And I refer back to them. So please, anyone listening to this, you know, if you can just use me as a bridge to get to the bigger brains on this, please do. Um, so one of the things that uh, Gronowski has talked about and is directly inspired by Girard's work is that there's differentiation, which is key to civilization. So differentiation in sense of mine, right? What I possess, what is mine. Um, you see this with differentiation is critical for civilization. It's the idea of what is mine and what is not mine. Um, Almost in terms of borders, right? My 2-year-old daughter is going through this right now, where she's claiming everything, mine, mine. This is mine, mine, whatever. So you can see it as early as 2. Uh, Obviously not everything's hers, but it's important in the development of the individual or the self, because you have to understand what is yours and what isn't. That's minor key differentiation. On a civilizational scale, let's say we talk about the nuclear family. We understand what is family, right? Our family is different than others, right? Ours, all families are the same, but yet each one is unique. In having strong senses of differentiation within the group, because we won't get into the false dialectic of Hegel, where it's like the individual and the collective are one. These things are a paradox; they self-inform each other. So differentiation allows us to create those borders of the self, right, where where these things are mine and not others. Where this plays into mimetic theory is that if when we start to break those borders of differentiation down, which we have and which we're now experiencing with intersectionality and critical theory, it doesn't get rid of them, right? The scapegoat mechanism starts coming in, and those who don't have those things or don't have access to those things begin to make those things the enemy, makes those things undesirable and must be destroyed. I don't think it's a coincidence that the more prominent voices against the nuclear family are coming out of the African American community in the United States, right? Because it's like, if we follow that there's a problem in the African American community, there's an issue, well, we'll say, that of holding families together in a nuclear family style for whatever reason, and that's a bigger conversation. But because of their failure to do it, they've gotten to a point where they now are attacking the nuclear family itself, right? The differentiation of the nuclear family being held in high esteem, something to model. Well, they failed to model it, so now it must be destroyed. So we're seeing this happen all over the place. Intersectionality, and certainly it's infecting the left right now, is making all those other things that are not that the enemy. And it can go from cancel culture to minor feats of violence. Eventually, it'll turn into large scale violence, because as long as it exists, it's almost an affront to or a danger to the collective, right? And that's kind of where we're getting at, and it's getting pretty dangerous.
Now, you mentioned the scapegoat. So for those who don't know, what is the scapegoat?
So the scapegoat mechanism under Girard is the idea that to avoid all against all violence, we select an all against we defer to all against one. So okay, let's backtrack a little bit. So in mimetic theory with desires, let's say you and I are neighbors, right? We're mostly alike, but we are now in competition. You have a nice car, so I get a nicer car. So then you get, some other outward signs of symbols, and we're in competition with each other. Eventually, what's going to happen is we're going to become rivals, right? So we're actually one or both of us are going to start to want to get rid of the other, because now what you have and I don't becomes an affront to me, right? It's becomes it's telling me that I'm lesser than, and I can't, and the human mind doesn't like that very much. So you become my enemy. If you start taking this on scale, what ends up happening is people start to turn on each other. So in basically inciting all against all violence. So what the ancients figured out is that, and this is a process of differentiation, they want to find the one person who's different, right? Who's outside the group. It could be a birthmark, could be anything, right? And they attach all the problems of the society onto that person, and then they get rid of that person, right? Either through sacrifice, human sacrifice, through throwing them out of the community, whatever have you. And what that does psychologically or culturally is it alleviates the problems, right? It's a pressure valve situation. And they say, well, now that we got rid of that person, then all things are great now and lovely, and we can return back to our normal lives. And it kind of decreases that mimetic tension for a little bit. It'll come back. But
Yeah.
it was a very, very effective tool for a very long time until Christianity, until Jesus kind of broke the model, or broke the mechanism. Because what's what's what needs to happen with the scapegoat mechanism is that we all have to believe that the scapegoat is guilty. The scapegoat must be guilty in order to produce catharsis. Their death then produces catharsis. And in ancient civilizations, they often make now my daughter's chimed in. They've often make.
Man, she sees you on a podcast. He wants to get on the podcast.
Oh yeah. She's going to replace me at some point. Don't worry. But the scapegoat must remain guilty. The scapegoat often then becomes a god in many cultures, because they're seen as the person who can alleviate woes. Right? Oedipus is a classic example of this. With the modern use of it, and you can see this with, let's say, liberals versus conservatives or traditionalists. All sins are being placed upon the other group, so they're the reason everything is wrong. And if we got rid of them, then suddenly things would be magically better, which we know is not true. But that's the reasoning we're going with. And I mean, I think that's the scapegoat mechanism in a nutshell.
What's really interesting about that when you mentioned that is that it's the right is trying to scapegoat all the problems onto, say, the trans population, or to the African American population, or to all these different groups. And at the same time, the left, through violentalism, is elevating those groups to positions of authority, because they know that take the outcasts of society, elevate them, they're not going to be able to turn their back. And so the right is trying to blame the same people the left is elevating. And so this kind of seems to be a even worse cycle, because the people the right wants to blame, pin all the problems on, are now becoming those in charge of society. That seems to make a really bad spiral.
In a weird way, like wokeism is trying to pick up a lot of this problem came from the dereliction of duty from the church, right? Both Roman Catholics and Orthodoxy and the prominent Christian churches. What their job should be. So the Jesus narrative breaks the scapegoat mechanism, because before that, you always sacrifice the guilty party, right? Jesus was innocent. We all know he was innocent. It's incumbent upon the story. When he is sacrificed and still provides that catharsis, it breaks the mechanism, because now we can return to it and go, see, you always have to give you always have to think about a victim, right? The victim narrative is central to the Christian narrative, and it allows us to have a pause and go, well, hang on a second, are we doing the right thing here? It even goes down to, like, he who is guilty, who's without sin, throw the first stone. This is incredibly it's almost what the church can offer us, right? Is a way to break the scapegoat mechanism completely. The church became derelict in its duty because of that. It started picking sides and choosing who to support in violent movements. As soon as it does that, then it's like, well, why do we need the church? People abandoning the churches, I don't think, is an article of faith or science. It's actually about mechanisms, and when those mechanisms are no longer useful, people will abandon them. So the real reformation of the church, in some ways, will be a restoration of its guard against scapegoating, and all these rituals were produced by the church in order to defer actual physical violence into something else, which is a very powerful thing that humans can do. Even when you think of, let's say, the sacraments, right? Like, eat the wafer, drink the wine, eat of my body, drink of my blood, right? That's a cure against cannibalism, which was openly practiced during the time of Jesus. So it was a way to say, like, don't do cannibalism. You can do this other thing instead, right? This other ritual, which gives you the same benefits of perceived benefits of cannibalism, but you don't actually have to eat people. One of the things you notice when primitive cultures began, or pagan cultures started accepting Christianity, one of the biggest things that always happened was human sacrifice just stopped, and human sacrifice was being practiced by everybody. Like the Norse, the classic one with the Vikings is like, yeah, they used to kill people all the time and eat them. Um, then they adopted Christianity, and then they just didn't do that anymore.
Mm.
So thanks, Christianity. It's one of the things that atheists tend to not bring up. Is like, it stopped cannibalism. So
You're welcome.
there's that to it. Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay. So one of the reasons I've gotten more into this, there's so many ways. It's really interesting about René Girard and his mimetic theory. There's so many ways to take it. You could take it into, like, okay, let's say, I mean, Peter Thiel, he took it into like business practices. People have taken, like, now political sociological stuff. People have been doing theological stuff with it. Now they're doing like philosophy. And you can really, it's such a fundamental thing. It can be applied in like Bible stories. It can be applied in business. It can be applied in politics. You really apply it everywhere. And so it's really, I've learned a lot of new ideas over the past like 2 years, and they've all have like very specific uses. But very, very rarely do you get a new idea that's like applied everywhere. That can be used in everything.
It's so elegant and simple too. That's the crazy thing about it, right? It's like it's a very simple thing, and I hope I've been trying to explain it as best as I can. But once you get into it, it just unravels your brain, right? Because again, you start seeing it everywhere and everything, and the applications of it are immense. Like you said, it's applicable in everything,
Yeah.
and also examples of its proof. Like advertising wouldn't work without memetics. Like it just wouldn't function. You need it.
Pretty soon
Again,
when
if you're
medics will pretty soon when medics will why start smoking cigarettes.
absolutely no, well, absolutely right.
Absolutely.
Someone modeled that behavior for you,
Yeah.
and for good or for bad, you became convinced that this is the cool thing to do, right? Or
Yeah.
either it's cool, or it's right, or it's status, or it's this, or
It's
it's that,
something.
right? I mean, so even with the idea of forgiveness and mercy, uh memetics really plays a big part in that, or at least in my way of thinking of things. Because one of the things you become aware of is that most people, I would think almost everybody really doesn't understand that what they want is not what they don't know what they want. They don't know why they want it. Um, it's you can devise nefarious reasons for it, but even we'll take morality out of it. um, you can start to forgive people on that basis, simply saying that, you know, it's almost like forgive them, Lord, they know not what they do. It's literally true. They don't know, right? There's no rationale to this. They can apply it afterwards, but they don't really have it in the moment. They just want what they want because someone else wants it, and they're either being guided towards it, or it's just pure and simple models. It's also interesting too is that you can see I think people instinctively understand this, or some people at the top understand this very, very well. The way they move against certain figures, like an Andrew Tate or a Kanye right now, they're moving against them not just for what they're saying or what they're presenting, but they're moving against them because these guys are very powerful models.
Yeah.
People will want to be like them, which is a trap in and of itself. But because they're so powerful as models, they're a massive danger to the other narrative, right? Because what both of these guys are talking about, in a more general sense, is a confrontation to this new liberal hive mind thing that wants to get rid of this differentiation that they're promoting. This idea of self determination is just not jiving with the liberal message right now.
Yeah.
So they need to be destroyed, not because of Kanye saying some of the Jews, um, although there's part of that, right? But
Yeah.
they're trying to destroy him because they don't want people modeling him, and he's a way more powerful model than anyone on their side. I was just thinking about this the other day, like, Trump was a model, right? People modeled Trump. No one modeled Obama. Like you'd have to. I can't think of anyone who's modeling Obama, like who's not Obama, but who's a prominent thinker or
Yeah.
presenter or something like that, who is anywhere like Obama that people can go, oh, it's Obama, right?
Yeah.
Can't think of it. There's
You
tons of
see,
Trump ones.
you can see it a lot in like stand-up comedy. You like there's a I can't remember who it was. Some guy. I think it was Mark Norman, the comedian. He's really very funny. He talked about when he first started doing stand-up comedy. He'd be talking, doing his bits, and like 6 weeks into it, someone yelled, "Stop doing a Seinfeld impression," because he was just doing a Seinfeld voice and Seinfeld kind of way of talking. He was just like mimicking other comedians, and it's you see a lot of stand-up comedy, which is another interesting way of like just kind of seeing it happen in place. And people are modeling these people are modeling the models of the desires, I guess. I don't know lingo enough of mimetic theory to like say these things in the proper context, but you can
No,
see
you're
it.
that's spot on, right? So hang on a second, man. Let me just put this on my. I
All
just deal with
good.
the daughter. Sorry about that. Right here.
All good.
No, you're spot on, and that's a good example. So because we unconsciously, in many cases, model other people. One of the interesting things in the West, especially, is that we place a high degree on uniqueness. That you have to be unique. But in reality, a lot of people who are very successful, especially in art, are people who are not afraid to show their mimetic influences. Quentin Tarantino is a perfect example, right? Quentin Tarantino has made a career out of copying, in many ways, blatantly, other people's work, or let's say a whole genre of movies or styles, right?
Yeah.
Um,
You see it
and
clearly
that's
in the
just
interviews when he talks about it. He was like, I saw this in this movie and I want to do it this exact way. I can remember he talks a lot about all Japanese films. He said, I want to imitate that, or that's Western. He openly admits it, which is, I always I like that about him. Because I always want to know where to watch more stuff that's similar to his kind of stuff.
well, Tarantino, I think, is a really good example of how the way to reduce mimetic tension and rivalry is to have many different models, right? The more models you have, the better in general. Uh, Especially if so, and even the more desires you have, the better. This is why capitalism works so well for a very long time. Is it's diversifying desires so that many different people can all find their thing, and then those groups will start coalescing around that thing, that desire. Let's say it's video games, right? Um, you're going to have gamers as a general group who are all basically the same. If you zoom out, they all look the same. If you get inside, they're all a little bit different. This is especially true in ideologies, right? Libertarians, to the outsider, look all the same. On the inside, it's a freaking mess, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so you'll have tensions, and you'll have rivalries within the group, but the taboos that keep the group together are sacrosanct to that group, right? It's a little bit different with things with gamers, because what's the thing, you play games, right? That's the thing that's holding you together.
You can see it
In
on Twitch,
ideology.
man. The people who I saw dyeing their hair different colors because that one ninja guy had his hair blue. Now all these different Twitch streamers got their hair dyed. You
Yep.
gotta find some way to stand out.
And why is it ninja? Because ninjas, it has attained a certain level of status, and
Mm-hmm.
and he's higher in the hierarchy, and so you want to ape the higher person in the hierarchy to show that you are a part of his group. So even if you can't rise to the top of the hierarchy, you can at least you can be visually similar, so people will identify you with the king, right? With the person that's at the highest reach.
This is why
I mean,
so
this
many
speaks to.
podcasters have books in the background.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, you know what?
Damn
I started seeing that. Yeah, well, there you go. The difference is you actually read this shit. So it's.
I don't.
I think a lot of people. I think a lot of people just have books just there
Yeah.
for things. One of the things that always frustrated me was when you see people do these studio builds, and I'm not like a crazy audiophile, like no whatever, but you see people with all the sound dampeners, the sound panels everywhere, and you realize you're in a room. It's like, that's not helping you out, man. Like, I don't know where your house is, like, unless your room is in the middle of a fucking freeway. Like, I don't know what you think those things are doing for you,
Best
but it's
one
visual.
on
But
the
it's
daily
visual.
on the Daily Wire, or they all have a microphone on the table. They all use the lapel
Yeah.
mics.
I hate it.
That one
So
frustrates me
much.
so much. It's so stupid.
Russell Brand was doing the exact same thing, and it bugged me so damn much because
Russell Brand can do whatever he wants. He gets a pass from me on everything because he was in my favorite Adam Sandler film, Bedtime Stories. So he kind of gets
fair
a
enough.
pass. He gets a pass.
Fair enough. But something about that, right? Because what is it, right? What is it? Well, it's a presentation. The mic says, "I'm a podcaster," right? Joe Rogan has a mic, so therefore, I mean, even the mics I have, like, sure, I bought it because it's on Rogan, but it also tends to be a really good mic when it's not fucking
Yeah.
cutting out every 15 minutes. I blame StreamYards for this. But it's like, yeah, you start seeing things, mic arms, right? Everyone started getting the same red mic arm because it was on Rogan, and everyone started getting the exact same mic arm. It's people always find who we always know who's atop, right? We always know who has high status or who's at the top of the hierarchy. You don't need news reports to tell you that, because you can always trace it back. Okay, well, who is guiding people? Who are people mimicking? And you find out who that is, and usually it's like a handful of people, and that's who's driving it. Because again, we're in a small subsect of people. Not everyone's a podcaster. It can seem that way sometimes, but not everyone has a podcast. So it's like, okay, well, what kind of podcaster are you? You know, I've even had these discussions with Mark. It's like, my co-host for our weekly show, even, it's like, well, who are we like, you know, what kind of shows are we kind of like the most, and I think we're sort of in a no agenda, even Timcast kind of thing. I see a lot of similarities that are sort of organic with us, so it's like, okay, well, then we can lean into that a bit more and see what they're doing, and figure things out from there. It's important, right? I think the thing with mimetic theory is that there's a way and Luke Burgess talks a lot about this. There's a way to get out of it a little bit, right? To zoom out of your own life and to start to see who are your models. Like, who are you modeling and why? Why are you doing these things? You know, why is this? You know, when you get to that point, you can start to make some choices, because free will is still, everything we've been discussing up to this point makes it sound like a really strong case for the Sam Harris idea that there is no free will, right? If everyone's just modeling each other or modeling somebody, then you know, you're not responsible for anything you do, because it's always someone else, right? And there's something to that. What are you doing? I got a monkey on my lap. There's something to that. At the same time, free will still kicks in when you can start to say, well, hang on, like, I can still be in control of this. There is still a self-actualization process that has to happen, and where you are becoming more in control of who influences you and how and why, and in fact, you then can become an influencer. You know, the classic example is always the king is the creator of culture. He's and the best kings in this case are modeling Christ, you know, the King of Kings. That's why it's such a powerful narrative structure. And going forth in the Middle Ages and so that it was such a powerful way to influence the elite, because it's like, look, if you don't know what to do, be like Christ, and you're not going to go wrong. Like, you
But
know,
the
there's
people were
nothing.
in the what would you just do bracelets.
Yeah, you know, Jesus take the wheel kind of thing.
Yeah.
But in medieval Europe, and of course, people screwed it up all the time, right? And
Yeah.
if there's a good atheist argument from the new atheists that's saying that the church abandoned or didn't live up to its high-minded concepts, and that's true. But it's also built into the faith that it's like, well, you're gonna fail. Like, it's
Yeah.
not, you're gonna fail. It's okay to fail. You just keep trying. Like, it's not like you give up on the entire enterprise, because again, and it's hard to find any even new atheists who's going to go, well, Jesus is a horrible person. It's like, no. Even if
Yeah.
you think it's a story, it's a good story. Like, if you're going to model anybody, you model the most perfect human being that's ever existed. Okay, well, you know, there you go.
Yep.
Like, yeah.
Well, this is about, well, if we're doing the experiment like on 5, this is probably what I would call it, because we got the basics laid out, the fundamentals all done: scapegoat, mimetic, desire, rivalry,
I hope that
spirals.
makes sense, because I know
No,
when I
it
get into
does.
this, I've tried to do a live reading and explanation of some stuff for Girard, and this might just speak to my limitations. Um, but when you get into this stuff, it's like on paper it's very simple. Right? He'll hit you with this very simple concept, like you mimic the desires of other people, and you're okay. Uh, and then when you start getting into that, it's a much bigger concept, and it's much more far-reaching. So I encourage anyone else to do their own reading. There's a few good resources out there. There's a 4 hours CBC documentary they did with a talk with Girard, that you can get on YouTube. David Grodowski is great. Luke Burgess is great. There's a I just forgot his name. There's a few. If you look out, if you do a search on just even on YouTube, you can find a lot of people who are doing deep dives into these concepts. Um, and I highly recommend it. It's one of those. I think he's a great bridge through between intellectuality and let's say spirituality. Um, and I mean we've only scratched the surface on his talks about Christianity, but yeah, I think he can make actually a lot of true believers out of secularists.
And he was very recent. He died in 2015. Which
Yeah,
is just people. You mention anyone Catholic, people are like, oh, 1400s, got it. Like, this guy died in 2015. He used words like woke in his Lexus. Like he's
yeah. It's a shame because I would love to see what he would be saying about the current situation,
it
especially
would have
with.
been.
Yeah. Okay. let's call it here.
Sounds good. Jason, thanks for coming on. Where can people find you at? What are your plugs?
2-Bit Podcast. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify primarily. Spotify, I've basically just been putting up the Friend or Fed episodes. YouTube, you can find everything else until we get canceled. We're also out there on Rumble. We're out there on Rumble and Odyssey and a few other places. And then, of course, on Twitter. Just check us out at 2-Bit Podcast.
Sounds good.
Tilda.
Well, everybody, thanks for listening. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Read more books. I'm gonna try to get this up tonight, and so Wednesday I have Owen McIntyre coming on for an episode of for a book club on The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. So that's gonna be a very exciting podcast. Yeah. Besides that, everyone, have a good night.